unintelligent, incompetent, words used to describe the findings of the Army War College study of 1925. Blacks cannot fly.
The Army War College completed a 3-year study studying the performance of black soldiers in World War I. They studied the physical, mental, moral, and psychological characteristics of the Negro.
They came up with the conclusion that Negroes were inferior to whites. They lacked the intelligence to participate in sophisticated type activities.
You're incompetent, you're non-athletic, you're incapable of operating complicated equipment.
The bottom line of which, and it's quoted in the study, is that Negroes are subspecies of the human family. And that's what the general public, the legislature, and the military, that's what they all believe.
That was very demeaning and very insulting that someone would say that because of my birth heritage and my cultural background, I was an inferior person.
Equipped with the findings of the Army War College study, the Army Air Corps protected the status quo by refusing admittance of blacks into pilot training.
I went there 24 times, applied, and trying to get an application. And that recruiting office could not give me one.
And I applied with 2 friends of mine who were white. We were all in school together. And after about a month, both of them got called and I didn't. And so I went down to the recruiting office and said I took the test with these guys and they got called and I didn't. And he said, well, they got better marks. I said, no, I got the best mark because they corrected your paper in front of you in those days. And when we got out, Tony and I, we had checked what we got, and I had the best mark.
But they wrote back and said you are mentally incapable. You don't have the physical coordination that you have. And if we did, you put you in an airplane, you'd be dangerous to any other pilot.
There was a young man by the name of Wendell Willkie running for the presidency, and he had promised the Negroes through the media, you elect me president of the United States and I will see that the Negroes get into the Army Air Corps.
President Roosevelt then ordered the Army Air Corps, who was still reluctant to have this program.
The proof is in the pudding. One simple flight was enough to spark a major change.
Mrs. Roosevelt had come and had flown with an African American by the name of Alfred Anderson.
And she saw, while she was there, she saw light airplanes flying around the Tuskegee Institute as it was in campus. And she asked questions, because she's always very inquisitive First Lady.
And asked him why was he walking around with a helmet on and boots, leather jacket. And he said he was a pilot, and she says, no, you can't be, because colored people can't be. Because, we got this information from my husband. So he said, I can fly. And she says, well, let me see, give me a flight.
And she gets in the airplane, and her entourage just nearly had heart failure. She was actually going, with a black, blah, 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 blah. And you could just imagine the consternation that they were showing.
Secret Service had a fit that she was going to fly off in this little funny-looking airplane with a colored guy as the pilot. And they informed Anderson that he was to take off real slow, climb up, make a couple of turns, and land again in 5 or 10 minutes. Anderson said yes, and he had planned to do it. And they got in the airplane and took off. He said, Mrs. Gould asked him, can this thing fly to Mobile? And he said yes. And she said, let's go look at Mobile. So now what was going to be a 10-minute flight is now about an hour. He said that when they came back and landed, the Secret Service had been in the president's office in a panic. Who was going to call Mr. Roosevelt? Let him know that his wife had gone off with a colored guy.
The dreams and aspirations of young black men soared just as high.
I lived about a mile from a small air base, and as a 7, 8, 9-year-old, I'd cut school. If my mother ever found out, I would have been killed. I'd cut school and go to this little airfield, and that's where I got my ride in a Waco, and work around and with the guys on this small airfield, once or twice a week. Built model airplanes with balsa wood and with the stinky glue and the whole bit. Draw pictures of airplanes. I wanted to fly, yes. And then the opportunity came.
And we went on the 4th of July to Teterboro Airport. And the flying circus was going on. Finally, he kept circling. And the guy with the megaphone finally said, this airplane apparently doesn't know how to land at our airport. We're going to send somebody up to lead him into the traffic pattern. I was saying, that's through St. Louis. He didn't pay me any attention. So finally, after much aggravation, he looked out to that maybe 5,000 white people. Says, this little colored boy here says that's the spirit of St. Louis. Oh, I hurt my feelings. When the airplane landed, it was as they rolled the airplane along, where Dad was, he called each one of us to where he was and let us all touch the spirit center. I guess it got to me. I went back and told, I'll show you. You laugh at me. I'll show you. I've been in Avies ever since.
I was a fan of World War I fighter pilots as a young man. I read about them. They were all handsome, they were all brave, they all wore long white scarves, and I thought this was great. And so when World War II started, I said, well, if I'm going to go to this thing, I wanted to go. I was not a draftee, I just wanted to go. I thought I owed the country something.
You know, they were drafting everybody, and back in those days, black folks that they drafted ended up in the Army in some menial task, you know, doing latrine duty, doing road duty, and all this kind of stuff, shining somebody's shoes, and or else in the Navy as a steward, and that wasn't very aspiring for a career.
It sounded like it ought to be better to me to be able to get in the air rather than to have to carry a rifle around on the ground and deal with the mud and weather like that. And I fell in love with it once I had that first flight.
A lot of the guys I knew were applying for flight training. I said, do I want to fly? Not necessarily. You know, I thought if I want to fly, God would have. I've been born with some wings. But I thought about the extra pay. I love the women, I love the booze, and you know, it takes a little money to support both those habits.
In World War II, if you're black, you were drafted, you went to the quartermaster. Heavy, nasty, filthy, dirty work. $21 a month. But as a pilot, you go to pilot school, pilot training, $75 a month. After 9 months, the second lieutenant with a gold bar, Set of wings, $150 a month. And $75 for flying. $2 1/4. With the excitement of flying. And all the pretty girls. Which would you take? Bunk private? Hell no. See? Why I wanted to fly? We had a good time.
Armed with desire, ambition, and finally permission, black men came from all over to fly for their country.
From the beginning of the war until the war ended, over 11,000 colored youth with college educations volunteered. 11,000. And yet when the war ended, less than 1,000 finished. You'll hear two numbers, 994, 994, and 996.
Because in recruiting the Tuskegee Airmen, they recruited the smartest students, the best leaders, and the best athletes. So it was all very competitive.
So the test was, you didn't go in and just sit down and a doctor listened to your chest. There were a lot of physical things that you had to do during your examination that could get you eliminated.
And of course, 20/20 vision. And 116 pounds. I weighed 115 and a half. So I went downstairs and drank some water and ate some bananas, got back on the scales, 116 and 1 ounce. That's how I passed the test. That's how I passed the test.
As they climb toward their dreams in the sky, the men fight fierce opposition on the ground.
Running to Washington, D.C., which was a kind of an ambiguous city with race relations. You could ride the public accommodations, the streetcars. You could go and sit in the ballpark. You could go to the government buildings and museums in an unsegregated way, but you couldn't eat in the restaurants. You couldn't go to the theaters. But in the deep South, it was such that you couldn't do any of those things. It was total segregation.
I passed the sergeant. I was a big second lieutenant. Pilot's wings on, gold bars. And he passed me by, and I expected him to salute, and he didn't. And he walked by with this young lady with him. And I don't know what irritated me. And so I stopped and said, "Hey, you." And he stopped and turned around. And I said, "Didn't you see me?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Why didn't you salute?" And he says, "Well, I was going to, sir, but she didn't let me. She held my arm." And I said, "Oh, she did?" I said, "Well, when you pass me again, if she holds your arm, take her up there with you."
It was very dehumanizing to see how we were treated as sort of second-class citizens in this country, and yet we had to go out and possibly shed our blood in defense of the country. But
my objective and the objective of most of us was to get through this experience, get to be a Tuskegee Airman, fighting racism where we could with various things on the margin, but we knew we weren't going to change the world that way. We thought we might change the world by becoming great pilots, which in fact we did.
Judging a man by the color of his skin makes no logical sense. Tuskegee Army Air Base needed Noel Parrish.
Frederick Von Kimball, who was a staunch segregationist, and he started putting up signs, colored and white and so forth. He lasted a year, and there was such a hue and cry from the black community that he was replaced by Colonel Parrish.
Colonel Parrish, although being a Southerner, did believe that we could be successful, and he thought we had the same skill and we should be given a fair chance.
Obviously, he had no use for that position because he didn't go along with it. He didn't see he was a very logical man, and if there was just no logic to it, then he would knock it down.
He was a very considerate man who took all those signs down, colored and white and so forth, and treated us as American.
And he has written this. He wrote extensively that they're Americans and they're men and they can fight like Americans and we need them.
It wasn't easy for whites at that time to volunteer, as about 20 white pilots volunteered to go to Tuskegee and teach us flying the Army way. And that was easy. It was not easy for them because there was one epithet that was even worse than the one that applied to us, the N-word, and that was an N lover, a nigger lover. We were born as we are. We couldn't help ourselves. We're black because we were born black. But a white person who undertook to teach a black person anything was subject to being called some very ugly words. They were scorned by their fellow officers and so forth. And the very fact that they taught us the best they knew how, we turned out to be the best the Air Force had, proves, first of all, the kind of caliber people that we had who finished the program successfully. And it also proves that there were some white Americans who were decent people, who weren't seduced by the idea that blacks couldn't fly.
Out of the nest and with training complete, the 99th Pursuit Squadron is sent overseas to test their wings.
So flying the airplane was no problem. We all knew the airplane, but we never knew what, I'll speak for myself, I had no idea how I would react the first time I knew some enemy pilot in an airplane was trying to kill me, was shooting me down. I didn't know.
It was a very quiet period when we got there, and the Germans were not coming back from across Africa and had evacuated Cape Bone and went to Sicily and then opened up to Italy.
There's an island between Sicily and North Africa called Pantelleria.
The Germans had captured that particular island and were given Allied shipping, a rough time in the Mediterranean. So it had to be knocked out.
The 99th, of which the 33rd Fighter Group was given the mission of trying to neutralize that island.
So the planners mounted a round-the-clock bombing of Pantelleria for about 2 weeks. They just continued bombing constantly.
We take off from Cape Bone and stay right on the water, meaning 20 to 25 feet, and fly straight out to sea to the island.
Dive bombing by fighter bombers such as ourselves, medium bombers like B-25, B-26s, and high altitude bombers, B-17, B-12, and just pounded them.
We were going every hour on the hour. 6 to 12 ships were taking off from Cape Bone.
Ultimately, after about 2 weeks, the Germans on Pantelleria just surrendered. Coming out. They gave up. They'd been bombed out of their mind.
There was a white flag, and contact, the Germans were ready to surrender.
And it's the only military target that I know of has ever been conquered purely by air power.
The people here, the civilians, politicians, and the military said, oh, I knew they couldn't do anything. Let's pull them back. It was, they were scared anyway. So they wanted to pull them back. B.O. Davis, the leader, had to come back to the United States to defend the record of the Tuskegee Airmen. He said, well, we're not even out there. You got us situated at places where we can't do our job. So what they did was, the military said, when you go back, you tell your guys their new job will be to protect the bombs.
The success of a group can be measured by its commander. Colonel Benjamin Davis Jr. was the solemn leader of the 332nd Fighter Group while overseas.
Before I met him, I had read about him that he'd gone to West Point. For 4 years, he had no roommate. All the other cadets at West Point had a roommate except him.
Nobody spoke to him other than an official capacity from the day he went there until the day he left.
What kind of officers did that produce? And I can tell you, he was tough. He was a tough officer who held us to the highest standards imaginable.
He knew the military. That's why, as a major and lieutenant colonel, he'd be a group commander.
Politically, he understood where he was and the times. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. We were young, fighter pilots, eager. We had no idea.
And he had good foresight, and I think his decision that we stay with the bombers was a critical one. Because by staying with the bombers, we had fewer losses than anybody else.
We realized this after the war. But during the war, we called him a lousy, crummy, stinking, no good. He kept me from being an ace. You see how things go? But you learn and you learn and you learn as you experience these things. And Bill Davis is the reason why for the success of the whole project.
With Colonel Ben Davis commanding and the pride of his men rising, success is imminent.
Yesterday I fulfilled one of my ambitions as a combat pilot. I got one airplane.
We had to be number one, whether we were mechanics or cooks or bakers or nurses or pilots or whatever. We have to be number one. That's what was expected.
Well, we did escort missions mainly, but normally, depending on the length of the mission, once the bombers got to a safe point going home, if you had enough fuel left, you would go and strafe for targets of opportunity. And we did that quite often. Go down and strafe anything on the ground, any moving targets on highways or trains if you could find any, or barges, so anything to hamper the Germans' movement of materials.
And part of our reputation is that when some of the bombers were damaged and they fell back from their formation, some of our pilots stayed with them to protect them. And that's why we were known as the Red-tailed Angels.
I was tailing Charlie in the group. There were about 16 of us in my flight, and we were the last flight over, and I felt the jerk, and someone said, "Flak!" And flak came up, and I looked up right off my wing, this little burst of flak, and I said, "Oh, well, that's what it looks like, you know." And I'm looking at this burst of flak. I was sort of fascinated by it, and I looked back, and everybody was gone. And so I turned to join the group, and I had to kind of pick up a little speed, and I'm heading in, and someone said, "Bogey, 6 o'clock." That was me. And so they dispatched a flight to engage me, and I said, "Hey, wait a minute, that's me. I'm trying to get back in formation." That was interesting. And that was one burst of flak out of an outhouse in Switzerland, and I made it back okay.
The Airmen proved their mettle March 24th, 1940. And proved their mettle March 24th, 1945 by flying their longest mission deep into the heart of Germany.
Well, the March 24th, 1945 is the historic mission of the 15th Air Force. The longest mission of the 15th Air Force, 1,600 miles round trip to Berlin. So this was supposed to be a prestige mission. We were going to Berlin to bomb the Daimler-Benz tank factory on the outskirts of Berlin.
This was supposed to be the most important raid in Italy during that time in World War II, because even though they were knocking out the oil in Romania and those places, the Germans were still strong. We bombed up all the gas and oil, and we don't know how they stay strong like that. So we said, let's go to their camp. That knocks some morale down and everything. Our pilots was brief. Some of them can tell you. They were briefed that the Germans had this 262 jet, the fastest thing over there. No, Americans didn't have any plane that could beat that plane.
I was over Berlin. I saw these jets coming up from about 7 o'clock. I realized they were jets. And you do things fast. I said, drop your tanks, follow me, which meant push the button, drop the external tanks, which give you more maneuverability if you don't have them creating drag. Follow me. I turned the plane upside down, did a split S, came down under. Jets were going this way. I came down this way. I hit him in the blind spot. He didn't see me. So then I turned up, came up about 5 o'clock. So I tracked him, pulled the trigger, right in the middle, hit him in the middle. He blew up, he parachuted, and that was the first jet that was shot down. And then my wingmen, who were following me, went off and saw a couple of others, followed them down to about 8,000 feet, shot pieces off of them, and they got confirmed victories. It was a high point of my career. It was a high point of our combat career. Not that we hadn't done outstanding things before, but it got people's attention shooting down these jets on the longest mission. And for that, we got the Presidential Unit Citation, which makes us one of the elite groups, fighter groups of the entire Air Force.
Husbands, fathers, brothers, sons, all fighting overseas against the Axis powers. Back at home, their loved ones do what they can to pass the time while awaiting any news.
When my husband was overseas, I had to depend on the mail, which sometimes didn't come on time, and then sometimes you get 2 or 3 letters at once.
And I wrote every single day, and you'd be surprised. Then I get a letter from him saying, why won't you write me? You know, so evidently maybe ships that had the mail got sunk or something, you know.
Enabling freedom to stand strong, there are sacrifices that have to be made. 66 of the airmen paid the ultimate price, while 32 were shot down and captured as prisoners of war.
The bombers were being hit, they were being hit, but they took them anyway, and they were on their way back. Limping on the way back was what the guys told them. And being squadron leader, they were still in the clouds and whatnot, didn't really know where they were, just that they knew how to get back, even though it was cloudy. And there was an opening, and Fred saw sunshine. And he said he was going to come down and let them know if they were out of the range of the anti-aircraft fire, and they had the sunshine to help them get back home. Well, they never heard from him, but all of them, the other 4 got back. So they never, until today, I've never known what happened.
On my 19th mission, first strafing mission we had, I went in and the 301st was assigned to strafe radar stations on the coast of southern France, outside the city of Toulon. I went right across the top of the target, treetop height. Something said, boom, I look up and there's a hole in the top of the canopy, and fire came up out of the floor. Damn shell had gone through. I pulled up off the deck. I don't know how high I got, maybe 800 feet, maybe 1,000. Turn the stick loose. Oh, after you go up, you reach up, little red knob, canopy goes off. I hit the buckle, and they came loose. When the nose popped, I came out. I remember the tail going by, pull the D-ring, and when the parachute popped, I'm in the trees. Number 1 and number 3 got through, and they looked back and they saw my plane go in, didn't see me get out. So they thought I was killed. When they got back, they reported me KIA, so my parents got a KIA telegram. I hit the trees, I'm in the trees, and unstrap myself, and I finally get out. And as soon as I hit the ground, I hear the guy says, "Ach so, ja, Leutnant, ja, Leutnant." I said, "Oh, hell, yeah." I landed right in the middle of the guys who shot me down. So I spent 9 months in Germany as a POW, awaiting transportation back to the States. Somebody said, "Hey, there's a place down there with a lot of dead people." What the hell are you talking about? He said, "They got dead people down there stacked up like cordwood." So naturally, we got a Jeep and we had to go find this place. We had never heard anything about Dachau. And to us, it was a revelation. Dead people stacked up, thousands of dead bodies. The ovens were still warm, where they were burning bodies. I described a table, 25 or 30 feet long, covered with hair, because before you burned the bodies, they had somebody with clippers cutting off the hair. You use the hair for seat cushions. Another table, 15 or 20 feet long, covered with rings. Before they burn the bodies, they already gassed the people, and they take the rings off. Table covered with rings. Another table covered with dentures. Before you burn the bodies, they had somebody with a pair of pliers pulling out the gold and amalgam. 15, 20 feet long, just covered. Man's inhumanity to man. I stayed there, well, less than a day because I got sick. And after that, we were transferred up to Le Havre to catch the boat coming home.
Celebration fills the streets of America as victory in Europe was announced. However, the heroes of the 332nd are welcomed home with the cold shoulders and racism that saw them off only a few years before.
And coming into the harbor, I always tell everybody about coming back home. The flags are waving, Statue of Liberty, and going down the gangplank, little white soldiers, whites to the right and niggers to the left. Coming back home after 9 months in Germany as a POW, fighting for this country. Irritating? Yes. But as usual, we Tuskegee Airmen, just like all the rest of the black men and women who went across seas fighting for this country, we came back home and we were part of the, let's say, instrument of helping to change this country.
We figured that we would really be kind of welcomed as heroes, you know, that here we had done very successful and been very successful in Italy fighting the war, and now as we got back here, nobody knew anything about what we had done.
Once we came back, we were strictly back into the role of being an American, back in the same old, after the war until, oh hell, lynchings are still going on, beatings and segregation. You still had guys like Helm in Congress, stormy Congress, still keep things going on. Civil rights movement started where they were young people trying to vote, children trying to go to school, Birmingham bombings, guy in Birmingham with water hoses on young people. See, all this is going. Life was still the same old thing.
The commanding officer created a separate but unequal club for the men of the 477th stationed in Seymour, Indiana. This club lacked the amenities such as a golf course, swimming pool, and tennis court.
He walks up there, got up the thing, and he said, "Hey," so we all sat down. And the first thing that came out of his mouth, he said, "You boys," that was his first mistake, "you will not go to Officers Club number 2. We have built you a club down the street, which is Officers Club number 1. He couldn't stand to think about these black bachelor officers, single officers, mixing with these wives and daughters of his white officers. We decided, said, now look, when you open the club this night, all dressed up in that Class A uniform and walk in that club in 2s and 3s, and we'll see what happened." It was nice. They had pool room, men to golf course, swimming pool, which you just about anything you want. So what they did, the major come in and close the club down. So the next day, commanding put out an order. In general, it said you has agreed to use a certain officers club. Just that somebody had it in the military fashion. So everybody could read it and see what the man wanted. He didn't want us fraternizing with the term he used. 50 or 60 guys ahead of me, 50 or 60 guys behind me. I don't know what the people in front of me and the people behind me going to do. And I'm thinking already working up there, you know, reading and signing. It didn't take but maybe 45 seconds to read that thing and sign it and get on out of the way. And I said, now if I sign this, I'm going to be telling myself that I agree with the segregation. And I have to live with that lie the rest of my life. I'm not going to do it. Just that simple. It puts him on the National Guard and ships him to Gardner Field. You have to realize they have American officers, flying officers, and bombardiers and navigators that's under house arrest behind barbed wire fence, and the German prisoner of war will walk around free as a breeze. I just hate it happened because but if it hadn't happened, that's going to happen somewhere else down the line. Because, you know, you got people who make sacrifices to get in the service, and you don't want to be treated like a dog. I volunteered for service. I didn't wait till I got drafted. I volunteered for service.
With the combat record of the 332nd and the unfair treatment of the 477th, President Harry Truman has issued an executive order to desegregate the military.
We were successful in showing, I guess, the world, the United States particularly, that blacks could fight effectively.
And all of the ideas that you get a large group of blacks together anywhere and there are going to be riots and discontent and all these just weren't facts. And that showed our society at large that there needed to be a change, and it wouldn't be a change that hurt the country. It'd be good for us because the talent doesn't come in color or happenstance of birth. It comes with opportunity and training.
Not only Tuskegee Airmen, but the 761st Tank Battalion that led Patton Down Black Tank Battalion. Black men who were quartermasters, moved tremendous amount of supplies during the war. And effects of the Navy, we didn't have any black officers until the Golden's 13. No black officers in the Marines. You see, segregation, discrimination, all of these men, through their efforts and their work, helped to bring about this country as we live today.
In the 40s, one of the things that was inherent in the military service was that they didn't want whites serving under blacks. And it just so happened that I also flew in Vietnam as flying a 4-engine gunship. And I was lieutenant colonel then. And I was the commander up at Udorn for a while, and of our unit, our detachment there, and also at Da Nang. And everyone under me, all the pilots were white. So it seemed like a complete turnaround from where we started in the service. So it's good to be able to live through those changes.
On March 29, 2007, the airmen were recognized with the Congressional Gold Medal, a final victory for the men and women who made the Tuskegee experience a success.
The Congressional Gold Medal isn't traditionally given to a group. It's given to an individual. So we were now making history again for a medal to be presented to a group. I think that what really surprised them were just how many Tuskegee Airmen took this as their day of recognition. And we had wheelchairs, we had canes. If they could get there, they were going to be there.
When the president came out and spoke to us, it was a glad feeling of people in the higher state of our government recognized what we had done.
It was, it meant a lot to me, and I think to everybody there, and to have the President of the United States to salute the men and to say that it was for the purpose of the salutes that had gone unrecognized and unaccepted and stuff like that.
Well, that was very uplifting and really heartwarming to realize that there was a recognition by all of the members of Congress that that what we had performed was certainly a big step for the country.
Well, that was sort of a somewhat of vindication of the fact that we did do a good job. They didn't expect us to start with. And it was also the fact that the country recognized what we did, the fact that we did fly well and whatnot.
And then I commented that the Congress of the United States, the House of Representatives and the Senate, who spoke for the people of the United States, and the President, who voices their voice to the American public, that repayment And I turned to the president and saluted him. I have a picture of it. It said, "Paid in full, sir."
Although many of the airmen have passed on, their courage and spirit refuses to die. Their legacy, too, will live on as long as their story continues to be told. Fly on, Red Tails, fly on.
We are hoping that this legacy will stay alive. We are working hard to make sure that it stays alive. There are still people, I say never, not enough, never enough, because if our children don't know about the Tuskegee Airmen, that is a problem. We should never forget.
I have an opportunity to, that a lot of the fellows do, to speak to a lot of schools all over the country. I've been all over the country doing this. And a lot of times when you look at the media, you get the impression that our kids aren't doing so well. But the experience that I've had, that in schools that I've been to, we've got some very bright young fellas coming along. Fellas, including girls, young people that are doing tremendously well. And they need to be encouraged, motivated, and encouraged to come along.
Be prepared. Get as much education as you can. Don't let your environment change you from good to bad and things like that. Try to help yourself every way you can. And hang in there on anything you want to do. Let no one tell you what you can't do until you find out you can't do it. And you'll find out you'll never find anything you can't do if you just work at it hard enough.
Stay in the ball game. Don't try to play a baseball game with football rules. The life we live in, socially, politically, economically, morally, is like a baseball game. Don't come into a baseball game with football rules. Learn the rules, learn how to cook, and help change this work and make this country a better world to live in. Bingo. How do we make it any better? Become involved. In my lifetime, black man being considered, even possibilities of being considered president of this country. It's fantastic. How do we go from there? Keep involved, stay in school, learn how to play the game, the baseball game of the United States of America. God bless America. Best country in the world. It ain't perfect, but it's improving.